Good day, everyone. On behalf of everyone here at SES Consulting Services, I want to both thank you for joining and welcome you to today's webinar dedicated to the do's and don'ts of double materiality assessment. I'm one of your hosts today, Stephanie Ellis. I'm a Senior Project Manager at SES Consulting Services. Before we dive into our presentation, I'd like to take a few moments to review our event platform, GoToWebinar. To avoid any unnecessary background noises during the presentation, all attendees have been muted, and this will remain a one-way presentation for the duration of the event. So if you'd like to ask a question, please go to the question section in the control panel on the upper right-hand side of your webinar console. Type in your question, hit send. Your question will be sent to our team to review. So we have a lot of content today, so we hope to have some time for your questions at the end, but any that we're unable to answer, we'll respond to you after the event by email. Today's presentation is being recorded as well, and a link to the recording will be made available to all registrants after the webinar. So in addition, we also encourage you to provide some webinar feedback at the end of the presentation in a quick survey. We also want to offer this disclaimer that the intent of this webinar is informational only, and we are not providing any legal or financial advice during the webinar. Now, I'll pass the mic over to my colleague and co-host, Marie.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, Stephanie. So your host today will indeed be Stephanie Ellis, whom you've just met, and myself, Marie Blasi, CSRD Program Manager within SCS Consulting Europe. So let's take a look at the agenda for today. We will briefly introduce SCS Consulting, and then we'll move on to the main concepts around double materiality to set the stage. And then we'll deep dive into do's and don'ts for the main building bricks of double materiality.
Awesome, thanks, Marie. So we wanted to provide a brief introduction to SCS Consulting, the dedicated advisory business under the SCS brand. You may also be familiar with our sister company, SCS Global Services, who is a leader in sustainability standards development, certification, and auditing. Also, under the SCS umbrella are the dedicated SCS Standards Development Organization and the Global Heat Reduction Initiative. So SCS Consulting was launched in 2021 and have grown our offices here in the USA and Europe, with Marie representing our EU office today. We have built a comprehensive services to serve as a partner throughout our client sustainability journey, where we support with the intent to create and achieve their sustainability goals in a rapidly changing climate and business environment. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you want to inquire on our services to support you. And finally, this slide is to showcase SCS and our global footprint to support our clients where they are and where their stakeholders are across the globe.
Great, thanks Stephanie for this intro to SCS. Now let me give you a short update on our favorite series of the spring, the Omnibus series. There is always something happening on that front. And actually today, the final text on the Stop the Clock was officially published. So let me explain. During our last webinar on the Omnibus, we presented the two directives that have been proposed by the EU Commission, one related to the actual content of CSRD and CSRD, and the other one, now famously called Stop the Clock, which is about the postponement of application dates for certain CSRD and CSRD requirements. So quick update on that one. It was an unprecedented fast-track process indeed. Just 1 month after the proposal of the Commission, the EU Council agreed on the mechanism and was quickly followed by the EU Parliament, who voted on April 3rd with a large majority. And again, the directive was published today. So the next step now is the transposition by the member states before December 31st of this year, knowing that some countries like France, for instance, have already taken measures to transpose in advance this directive. So remember, the most important goal of the institutions at this point were to remove legal uncertainty for undertakings. And so I think this part of the job is done. And now the more difficult sequence opens, as Council and Parliament will need to discuss in depth how the content of CSRD and CSRD will evolve. So meaning, threshold, timeline, responsibility, etc. So just to give you a little bit an idea about the calendar at the Parliament level, the first discussion within the Legal Affairs Commission will take place at the end of April, and a report is expected by the end of June, and a vote somewhere around mid-October. In parallel, EFRAG, which is working on, which is working on the ESRS, EFRAG has been officially tasked by the European Commission with simplifying ESRS. So EFRAG is supposed to deliver a first exposure draft by the summer and provide its advice by October 31st of this year. And the Commission provided guidelines to EFRAG, I would say clear guidelines, to substantially reduce the number of mandatory ESRS data points and, for instance, prioritize quantitative over qualitative data points. Then also to give clearer instructions on how to apply the materiality principle. And this is the topic for today. We will see that indeed it's not always an easy task. And then to ensure better interoperability with other EU legislation pieces and other sustainability reporting standards.
Awesome. Thanks for this update, Marie. It's really interesting to see how fast things can move. I'm sure it's good news to many companies to have more clarity on what's expected from them, especially for those companies that were in the wave 2 and preparing to report next year. So now we're going to dive into our main topic of the day, materiality.
Yes. So if you were in Europe over the past month, well, there is no chance you could have escaped the mention of CSRD, whatever business you're in, and the concept of materiality, which is closely related. And it's been all over the place materiality has been all over the place as a term everyone should understand. But actually, it might sound a bit like jargon to you or to your colleagues, and it makes total sense because it is. So let's go back to the roots of this concept. So materiality comes from the legal and the accounting world. It's very much linked to decision making. The idea is that the right information is provided for stakeholders to make decisions. So over the years, the user of material facts has been more and more considered to be almost exclusively the investor, but we will see that it is changing. So now, what do we use this concept of materiality in sustainability reporting? Well, for simple reasons, and several reasons. First, accounting structures, economic practices. So accounting is a way of organizing things and making sure to count what really counts. And then sustainability related information is information on which stakeholders will make decisions. So that's why sustainability reporting, especially in the format required by the EU Commission, adopts a view of non-financial data that is pretty close to accounting.
Great. So to summarize, to complete a materiality assessment, the idea really is to provide the right level of detail and the most relevant information to stakeholders, including investors, customers, corporate strategists, would-be employees, etc.
Yes, exactly. And as you point out, there could be many different people interested in this information. So you need to know who is interested by this information and who is the information considered material for. And this is not a small question. From which point of view does a specific piece of information have to be material or to be disclosed, and who are the users of the reporting? So in the ESRS Delegated Act published in 2023, EFRAG has given a list of stakeholders to be taken into account. So they are the users of sustainability statements and and here I quote, individuals or groups whose interests are affected or could be affected positively or negatively by the undertaking's activity and its direct and indirect business relationships across its value chain. So here you have some very important term, and Stephanie, you'll come back to that. I mean, we heard stakeholders, value chain. Of course, these are the building bricks of the double materiality assessment. So now if we focus on the users of sustainability statements, who are they exactly? Well, according to ESRS 1, users are primary users of general purpose financial reporting, and the undertaking's business partners, trade unions, and social partners, civil society and non-governmental organizations, governments, analysts, and academics. So ESRS adopts a very broad view with regards to who would be interested in the data that is being disclosed. And this is, for instance, a difference from what is stated in IFRS S1, which identifies primary users as existing and potential investors, lenders, and other creditors. So now we know where materiality comes from and who are the users of the reporting. So let's take a look at what it really is. As a starting point, it's worth mentioning that double materiality as a principle remains at the core of CSRD in the proposed simplification version. Okay, so this could change because we know that discussions are reopened from level 1, but it's not the spirit of what the EU Commission has proposed. So the principle of double materiality, which has always been described as the cornerstone of CSRD and as an innovation, actually, European innovation there in terms of sustainability reporting, assumes that both the financial effects of sustainability issues on a company and the company's impact on society and the environment are relevant and should be disclosed. This makes somehow a philosophical difference at the foundation of this model, which translates, for instance, in the way the concept of nature is defined. So if you take ISSB, for instance, and financial materiality, you will see that in this model, nature is represented through the services it provides to companies and the risk it generates, leading to gains or risks on the shareholder value. In the ESRS, nature is approached as a whole and somehow as a silent stakeholder whose interest can be affected positively or negatively by the undertaking's activity. So according to the ESRS, a sustainability issue is material from a financial point of view if it generates risks or opportunities that affect or could affect the undertaking's financial performance, cash flow, etc., whatever KPI you use here, in the short, medium, or long term. So here we are talking about effects to the company based on actions of the undertaking, of its value chain, or external factors that could affect business operations like floodings, fires, etc. And on the other hand, a sustainability issue is material from the point of view of impact when it concerns the company's actual or potential impacts, positive or negative, on people or the environment in, again, the short, medium, and long term. We always have this temporality dimension here. So it includes impacts linked to the company's own operations and to the upstream and downstream value chain. It also includes impacts generated by the undertaking's products and services. So in the end, double materiality results will find whether a sustainability matter is material based on the assessment of relevant IROs. We'll come back to this acronym, so impact, risks, and opportunities, and whether those matters overcome a threshold from an impact perspective or a financial perspective, or from both perspectives. So before we jump into the do's and don'ts of double materiality and the practical expert advice of Stephanie, we would first like to hear from you through this poll. So yeah, we'd like to know where your company stands with regards to materiality. What have you done, or what are you planning to do? We'll have yeah, we'll take a few minutes to, the poll is open now. We'll take a few minutes. Of course, the type of framework you are reporting against will have an influence on what you've done so far, but you might be intrigued by double materiality. You might want to test what is actually a great tool. We will come back to that. So we'll give you another 5 seconds maybe, and then we'll look at the results. Okay, so looking at that, so thanks a lot for taking part. And yeah, so we see that we have, I mean, double materialities at the, is like 1/3 of the responses. And interestingly, Stephanie, for 20% of the 20% of the participants say that materiality is embedded into our strategic decision making, which is great news, because that's what
Yeah,
we also want to advise companies should to do. So interesting. And
great.
1/3 haven't done any materiality. So we hope we can convince you by the end of this webinar. So well, because we think it's really a valuable exercise. So thanks a lot for your answers. Yeah, this sheds valuable light on where the audience stands in terms of this process of materiality, and we hope now the practical advice Stefan is going to deliver will add value to your reflection maybe, and your double materiality process or materiality assessment process. So now, Stephanie, can you guide us through the different steps of double materiality? It's described as a somewhat complex
Right.
process. So how do you actually assess double materiality?
Yeah, thanks, Marie, for covering the background on materiality work. And you're right, the process to approach double materiality, it's very complex. So it's a big project. You'll want to ensure you have the right project team and resources allocated to completing it. With that, for the next few slides, I'm going to dig into the do's and don'ts of double materiality. So the CSRD approach to double materiality is attempting to gear companies towards understanding a more holistic view of how their company impacts and is impacted by the world. The implementation guidance points to a number of exercises that are aimed at supporting a business to consider this. So these suggestions support developing a framework of context that supports completing a double materiality assessment for better accuracy and results. So we'll dig into each of these exercises in more detail, but the main activities identified to set the context are value chain mapping, identifying impacts, risks, and opportunities, which for short throughout the rest of the presentation, I'm going to refer to these as IROs, and then stakeholder engagement. And these three exercises provide the context for the overall assessment from an impact lens and a financial lens, as Marie described in an earlier slide. So with the goal to find the sustainability topics that are truly material to your business. So before we move forward, I do want to flag an important consideration at this time, which is how you plan to consolidate reporting efforts in alignment with the CSRD requirements. There are a couple different ways you can approach this depending on your organizational structure, but you will want to go into these exercises with your consolidation approach in mind. This will just help you stay more organized and be more easily able to parse out the results later with your report preparations work. All right, so the first exercise we'll dig into is mapping the value chain. So first, what is the value chain? The definition of value chain in the CSRD is also consistent with the definitions in GRI and ISSB that you may be familiar with. In short, it considers the activities, resources, and relationships to an undertaking's business model and external environment in which it operates and relies to create products or services. And this should include everything from concept to end of life. So why is the value chain exercise critical? If you see the double materiality assessment as a strategic exercise and a way to strengthen the resilience of your business model, looking thoroughly at the value chain makes total sense. If you don't include your value chain in this analysis, you will have a massive blind spot. So our first practical recommendation here then is when mapping your value chain, do not stop at your tier one suppliers. In a nutshell, looking at tier one suppliers or customers is absolutely not enough. CSRD wants undertakings to consider where, how, and who is involved in bringing a product or service concept to life and where it ends up. So think about the upstream and downstream implications. Consider raw material extraction, workforces, transportation, processing, etc. And then on the other hand, an undertaking needs to act pragmatically to not go over the top with the value chain while remaining in the frame of CSRD. So it's all about finding the right level of detailed balance. The next is follow a hotspot approach. This is, CSRD recommends a hotspot approach, meaning that once you have identified the various elements in the value chain, you should focus on specific items that might generate more IROs. For example, if you recognize activities in your value chain are located in an area known for water scarcity or where work standards are lower, then you may choose to focus more on that location over areas that tend to have better management of these concerns. So you may also think about where the majority of your specific suppliers are located. So if 80% of your supply all come from the same country, then focus on that country. As well, in doing this work, don't forget to ask for help. You won't have all the resources immediately to understand the full implications of how your business is able to operate and the details across your value chain. So working with sustainability professionals is a great way to help you fill the gaps. They generally have some good sense of where activities or geographies could be relevant to consider. And at least they will have the time that you may not have to do the research. So also remember that you don't need to have the value chain map perfectly with your first attempt. The ESRS 1.132 mentions that companies reporting under the standards have 3 years to deploy their data collection process across the value chain. So you have more time now, especially with that 2-year postponement that was voted in at the beginning of the month. But we don't recommend delaying the start of this size because it is such a large task. So primarily, the CSRD is a transparency exercise, and it's not just meant for the largest of companies. Be aware that the intent of the CSRD in gathering value chain and contextual information isn't meant to be malicious by forcing the company to expose itself. In fact, it has the potential to protect companies as well. By showing that you know where your value chain activities are located, even if you have not been able to collect the relevant data points yet, you will have more ability to identify potential controversies before they become real issues for your company, as an example. A second consideration in completing this exercise is that it can lead to better resilience. So when you can specifically identify where your suppliers are located, you'll likely have a better sense of potential supply chain disruptions and might enable you to create stronger business continuity plans. So where to focus? Don't just focus on existing risks. It's easy to take this lens, but ensure that you take a broader approach to be able to describe and map the activities, geographies, and relationships in your value chain. So identifying the risks and opportunities will come later. So just focus on the value chain as a function for now and identify how that function is able to exist. And then finally, what is the information that's required? So you may consider using the LSME standard, which is the simplified small and medium enterprise standard for CSRD compliance. And this could be considered a clear starting point on the level of detail you should start gathering for the value chain context. Also, don't forget about publicly available information to consider geographic area of operations, sector guidance, types of products or services, and the business model and goals of the company. All right, so once you have the value chain context, this should help you to start identifying what potential negative and positive impacts to the environment and society your company and value chain may be contributing to, and also what the potential risks or opportunities you have that may affect the financial stability of your business. So identifying IROs is the second context gathering exercise for completing double materiality. So how do you approach identifying IROs? What we have found extremely helpful in supporting our clients is, and what is recommended by the CSRD, is taking the value chain context to support the development of a long list of IROs. So where can you look for guidance to start building this list? So one of the major recommendations is that you start with the given ESRS AR 16 material topics, subtopics, to help guide you. By aligning to this framework, topic mapping busy work later on when you are attempting to connect material matters to disclosure requirements and data points for compliant reporting. In addition, to help you start this list, you should also reference existing frameworks, industry standards, or previous materiality work you've done. Please note that there are no sector-specific guidance through ESRs at this time, so don't plan to wait for them either. With the omnibus changes, these may not ever get pulled together. So referencing sector framework guidance from GRI for impacts and SASB for financial risks is a great place to start. However, with the CSRD looking for a more holistic assessment of the value chain, be aware that previous sector or industry guidance may be lacking to give you the full picture of IROs due to having too narrow of a focus. So for example, a road distribution company could look at SASB to identify that greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, workforce conditions, and safety are major topics to consider based on the SASB industry framework for road transportation. This is helpful, but it misses the full picture. First, these matters don't address the potential impacts because it's a standard based on financial material risks. And secondly, it lacks value chain material matters. For instance, if that distribution company uses and disposes of large amounts of pallets or still uses a paper-based tracking system for shipments, this could indicate that they should consider potential likely negative impacts from forestry practices upstream to their operations due to the high consumption of wood and paper products. So how do you enhance your list to include your value chain implications? You should start asking more in-depth questions about your business at this stage. And this should be regarding specific impacts to people and the environment and potential sustainability related financial risks and opportunities. This could be another place to pull in support from sustainability professionals who could be helpful in gathering more context and guidance. Things you should be asking are like, what capital and resource dependencies do we have? You should consider raw materials, workforce requirements, and upstream material and production operations, locations of resources, including workforces, and other items as well. As you are developing this list, also think in the short, medium, or long term. So is this an issue that's going to pose a risk immediately? What about 5 or 10 years from now? Then finally, please don't forget about IROs outside of your direct operations. Indirect issues may sometimes have just as significant implications to your business than direct ones. An example of this could be something as simple as a new industry coming online that requires a particular niche product that has a very small supply chain currently. If you also rely on that niche product for your operations and do not have an alternative solution available, then you could be at risk if and when that new industry comes online. So when you start to develop a framework of IROs across your value chain, you start to see even more potential solutions or efficiencies by adding this level of detail into your value chain context. So you'll likely start to begin like you can make more informed decisions to address your impacts and risks by just starting this process. Here we are. at the final context gathering exercise. So the CSRD suggests that by seeking input and feedback from stakeholders, it will give a company better context and evidence about actual or potential impacts across the value chain. So think of the stakeholder engagement piece of this double materiality process as a value add to give you more specificity and evidence to assess material matters. So an additional consideration before we dig into the do's and don'ts to understand what engaging affected stakeholders during a materiality assessment is consistent with practices. It is consistent by the CSRD suggestions, but it is not technically required at this time. However, the omnibus may be further aligned with the CSRD with their changes that they're implementing, and the engagement is required under the CSRD. So we do recommend going through this exercise because it will help a company gather evidence and lead to more accurate materiality assessments, but it also may cover your bases if future changes to the law indicate required engagement. So once again, we want to align to the value chain context here and be able to identify who is actually being affected by your operations, even existing. The previous exercises in collecting value chain context and identifying IROs may also play an influence in recognizing who may be an affected stakeholder or vice versa. So who are your stakeholders? In some ways, you can start to think about who is an affected stakeholder by looking at the major stakeholder groups to start broadly and break them down into more detail from there. So think about internal stakeholders like employees, management, or the board, external stakeholders like suppliers, investors, material processors, or downstream customers, product users, distributors. And then don't forget about the major last group that CSRD suggests, which are silent stakeholders. And so these don't have necessarily an associated company or voice, may include the environment, like natural resources, or social as the other silent stakeholder, such as human capital that looks at things like health and knowledge, or social capital that looks at relationship and the value they hold for your business. So now we want to narrow your focus. Once you understand who may be relevant, assess what stakeholders will truly add value to your double materiality assessment, and that you think will provide the insights or evidence towards assessing IROs. And remember, this is an iterative process. The first version of engagement may be messy, and that's okay. You can improve and refine your approach over time. So definitely take this initial exercise as a learning opportunity. So while gathering contact information, consider what number of stakeholders you plan to engage and what you would consider as the threshold of significance for receiving feedback to feel confident in your results. Too few, you may not gain useful insights or feel confident in the results. Too many, you may reach a lot of contacts that don't know anything of significance. So again, hone in on the stakeholders that will add value. This could look different for each company. It will also depend on the tactic for the engagement as well. There's some common practices we have seen for engagement tactics, including surveys, workshops, and interviews. If sending surveys, you want to consider the length and amount of detail you're asking of your stakeholders, especially since increased transparency trends in business. There's definitely been evidence that stakeholders feel fatigue in the number of surveys and assessments required of them, so just be wary of this. To increase response rates, you'll likely improve results of engagement if it's personalized in some way. You may also consider incentives to those who participate. And of course, make sure to consider the timing of the engagement. Another consideration is to not ignore the power of connection. Surveys seem like an easy way to go. We do see a lot of valuable information come out of them. With that, don't forget about other avenues like workshops or interviews. Many times, these conversational approaches allow for opportunity to gather more detail about what is really happening across your value chain, especially when you can connect with those identified external stakeholders. And this is also an opportunity where you can build a relationship for partnerships and work toward identified opportunities that you are discussing. So you could identify opportunities for better business relationships, improved product quality, or supplier working environments, or something else. So make sure to follow up with your stakeholders as well, to keep up momentum after your results are in and build those relationships. All right, and then remember the goal of engaging with stakeholders should be to pull in the evidence of potential impacts, risks, and opportunities, and have this information support your final double materiality assessment. So as a final recommendation, watch out for outliers in the information you're receiving. You may be discussing with your stakeholders and something new comes up that you haven't identified yet. So you want to make sure that you provide enough time for yourself before the real assessment that we'll discuss next to do some extra research on those newly identified items.
Stephanie, just a quick point. We have some background noise.
Yeah, I'm hearing that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, that's better. Great. Okay, so you've made it to the final event. You've collected overarching company information, value chain context, developed a list of IROs, and have engaged key stakeholders. All of these exercises should provide the foundation to support your business in understanding what is potentially relevant to assess. So let's talk about the do's and don'ts of your impact and financial assessment. So ideally, you have kept this initial work organized based on your consolidation approach, which we discussed earlier, but now would be a good time to ensure your ducks are in a row with your IRAs aligned to the specific entities that you will be reporting on. In addition to organizing for your consolidation, it may be a good time to ensure that any contextual information, policies, environmental initiatives, stakeholder insights are aligned as well with your IROs that you organized. Truly, the intent of doing all this pre-work and the double materiality assessment is to help filter results to enable an undertaking to focus on what really matters. An example from a real report that has already been published is DHL, the logistics company. They only gained a few material topics they are reporting on. So climate change, own workforce, workers in the value chain, business conduct, and then one entity-specific topic. And so we're not looking for quantity, but for relevance in terms of materiality here. And then don't forget to use eFrag. They have released implementation guidance on how to score these assessments. So at a minimum, it's a good place to start. You may decide as an organization that different scoring methodology suits your assessment better. It is just suggested. So the eFrag guidance is just suggested. For the sake of consistency, however, we highly recommend following a standardized approach, as this could be beneficial down the road if you do benchmarking or maybe consider making an investment like acquiring a business. Having an apples to apples comparison of their business is likely to you'll have an easier time making a decision on whether it's a worthwhile investment if you have that easy comparison. So ultimately, whatever scoring scale you choose to use, ensure that you have clearly documented this methodology, including the scoring threshold, so you can justify your immaterial, material, or critically material topics. So you do not need to reinvent the wheel here. If your undertaking already has due diligence or risk management processes in place that have thresholds like this, use that to inform your double materiality thresholds. There is going to be a sense of judgment here, and that's okay as long as you have the logic driving the thresholds and you feel confident in defending them. So these thresholds should be discussed and approved as well by leadership as a way to increase their validation of your final materiality results. And this increases likelihood of action to address them into your business strategy later on. So let's chat about scoring. The best practices in setting up scoring calculations to assess IROs do include looking at scale, which looks at the seriousness of a potential IRO or how harmful something is. So think about infringement of access to groups for basic life necessities, or how damaging something is to the environment. We also want to assess scope, which looks at how widespread the IRO potential is, so the number of people impacted or the acreage and environment could be affected. And then remediability, which is whether or not the negatively impacted environment or affected people or risk can be restored to its prior or natural state. So things like reparations, restoration of rights, reforestation. And then finally, consider likelihood of the IRO occurring to give it some perspective. So when completing the severity scoring exercise, a good thing to remember is that you are looking for gross assessment results based on sustainability matters identified. And what we mean by this is that you're not assessing the overall topic, like climate change or own operations, on a whole. What you are assessing are the individual IROs that are associated under these topics. So more specifically, the principle of gross approach to IROs within the CSRD are ensuring that you consider different types of impacts, like positive and negative influences of different types or topics, must not be offset against each other. This ensures that each impact is identified and assessed without distortion. The second is temporal separation, where current negative impacts cannot be offset by future positive impacts. And the same applies for current positive impacts and potential negative ones. And finally, that your own operations impacts must not be offset against impacts along the value chain, upstream or downstream. So be diligent in how you're looking and assessing your IROs. So finally, we recommend to graph out your results or prioritize those topics, those material results, and ensure you gain buy-in again from senior leadership. And this is just going to be another crucial moment to be able to add value to your business and utilize those results in your decision-making processes.
Well, thanks, Stephanie. This is highly valuable information, and so thanks for sharing that. Let's also highlight it's built on SCS experience supporting companies throughout this double materiality assessment process. Listening to you, though, this project could look a bit daunting, especially for smaller companies, right? So I think it's important to repeat what you've already said, that this approach could and should be iterative. So the importance is really to start somewhere and then build, right? Double materiality assessments are not meant to be a test uncovering a company's sustainability performance. It's a way to identify and prioritize matters that could pose real risks to a business. So it's a tool. See it as a tool that you can leverage to build a more sustainable and a more resilient business in a changing world. We think many companies will integrate double materiality assessments into their regular enterprise risk management, strategic planning, reporting activities. And those that start doing this integration sooner will also sooner identify inefficiencies or efficiencies across business and value chains. So you should use double materiality results for various operational objectives, including, as Stephanie said, filtering reporting requirements, and that's why we're having this conversation in the first place. You're doing your materiality assessment to align to the ESRS reporting requirements. It's a tool for determining which ESRS disclosure requirements and data points need to be reported on. ESRS have more than 1,200 data points, so you only want to collect and disclose data on the ones that are material and that make sense for your business to track. So again, it's not about quantity, it's about relevance. The next operational object is to use double materiality results as a transformation tool. CSRD is really about transformation. So transformation of the business models, transformation of the value chain, transformation of the economy as a whole. Yeah, very ambitious goal, but it starts with reporting actually. So we are not looking here to make a brutal shift, but to efficiently steer undertakings towards a more sustainable way of running their operations while remaining competitive. So double materiality assessment can act as a planning tool. Once I know as an undertaking what my material topics are, I can start working on the transition plans to address this topic. And these transition plans are, by the way, forward-looking tools that are very important for the undertakings and for their stakeholders. And we've heard of investors that actually take this transition plan into consideration when they are evaluating an asset. So finally, you can use the results as a strategy tool, and so should you. The double materiality results should be embedded into strategic work, whether it's about defining your 5-year strategic plan or your strategy regarding your manufacturing footprint or its variable insights. And as you said, Stephanie, it's important to have senior management buy-in, and the fact that senior management are included in the validation of the materiality process in most companies proves that companies indeed integrate materiality into corporate decision-making process. So time to wrap up now. We're actually a bit over time. Thanks for staying with us. First of all, let's say that double materiality is here to stay. There are discussions around which kind of materiality you could perform, financial or double, what makes more sense, what is more accurate. There are also calls for convergence between the different frameworks. And we have actually one concept that is new, that is coming to this field of what you can do in terms of materiality. It's called dynamic materiality. Maybe some of you have heard of that. But let's stick with double materiality for now. So the concept is relatively widely used. In fact, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development analyzed almost 200 reports in 2024 and found out that 77% of these reviewed reports disclose a double materiality process. And these are not only EU-based companies. And that's an important point as well. Actually, 78% of the reports issued in Asia Pacific are based on double materiality. And some countries and some regions have officially adopted double materiality as an approach. And for instance, China has adopted this approach in their new CSDS. So let's say that CSRD has not convinced all business stakeholders yet, but double materiality has earned its spurs. It's not an easy exercise. We've seen it. There are surely lots of operationalization enhancements that can be brought to deploy this exercise in a more simple way and a more efficient way. But I think that's a real shift. And yeah, we really believe that companies can use double materiality also, not only as a reporting tool, but also as a strategic tool, and that these companies will benefit from that. And you can think about it that way, like your competitor runs a double materiality assessment. What does he know that you don't? And that might actually have an influence on the course of your business. So maybe to end, as you may know, companies below the thresholds of 1,000 employees, according to the proposed omnibus bill, will only be recommended to follow the VSME standard. So that was the standard that was developed for SMEs, a voluntary standard. It does not include the DMA. However, we strongly encourage companies, especially the ones that are coming closer to the threshold of 1,000 employees, to maybe work on the VSME disclosures or any other reporting framework that makes sense to you, but also not to miss the opportunity to review the business through this new lens, the lens of double materiality. And we also advise not to delay this exercise, because to be beneficial, it requires time and attention. So the sooner you start, the earlier you will get great insights, actually. Yeah, with that being said, we hope you have enjoyed the webinar, and well, thanks a lot for joining us today. We have 2 more webinars coming up that will cover, one of them will cover CSRD and CSDDD, and the other one is dedicated to the reporting. You will receive the recording of the webinar in a follow-up email in the coming days. we might want to take one or two questions, Stephanie, even though we are a bit late, but let's use this opportunity that we still have lots of people online to take questions. So so we have here a question. We no longer fall within the threshold of employees to report to CSRD. What would be the benefits of doing a double materiality assessment now? Okay, so I think, I mean, Stephanie, you might want to add to that, but I think we can say at this point that the benefits of this approach are visible. Of course, European companies have engaged in this exercise, a lot of them actually, but we've seen that other, like Asian companies, have also run a double materiality assessment. I think what we can say, to companies that are not anymore in the scope of CSRD, is that the pressure to provide sustainability data will not be regulatory anymore. Depending on what happens with Omnibus, but yeah, the pressure will probably not be regulatory anymore, but of a different nature. And we think investors will continue to require double materiality assessments to be done as part of the data collection process they have to do. Customers will be more and more demanding in terms of sustainability data. And yeah, so and as an anecdote, we just heard last week of a company that is now out of scope because they really are way below the threshold of 1,000 employees. So they, during like 1 or 2 months, they were relieved, like they do not have to do this CSRD exercise. And after a 2-month pause, well, their investors came back, and I think investors and the management had taken the time to assess the situation, and now this year, 2025, they have decided to move forward with double materiality. So they are starting in 2025 to do a double materiality as a first exercise to move to some kind of reporting, maybe VSME, maybe something else. But I think it's an interesting feedback, and I think they are not the only ones to be pushed to do this exercise. Yeah, so let's take another one maybe. So Stephanie, you've described it as, it is a project. It requires probably many different skills, not only sustainability related skills. So how can internal teams collaborate effectively on double materiality, especially when they speak very different languages? Because you could have like the finance team and then the I don't know, engineering team, etc. So how do you organize that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The double materiality exercise is first and foremost, it needs to be a cross-functional exercise and requires definitely having sponsors from various areas of the business to add that context and that value. Again, we're coming back to that context gathering exercise. And so you're going to have a really strong project management team to be able to ensure that that information and those people are getting engaged enough to provide that. Yeah, it's a full on, you want to make sure that everyone in the company in their various departments are having the opportunity to be engaged. Training is a good way to start, having a setup, shared language, training on, what are the definitions, what is the language that we're going to be using through this exercise. This is something that I think isn't utilized enough, is cross-functional training exercises to learn a new language together, because ultimately this is a new language. It's not well known across groups, and as materiality is rooted in accounting, that's great, that there's some sort of a foundation, but it's going to be really new to most folks. So I would highly recommend training first and having a really strong project management team to push this forward.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. one last question before we close. Question is, how often do you need to revise your double materiality assessment? So maybe I'll take that one, Stephanie.
Sure.
I would say that there is no fixed frequency that is required, at least through the law, you know. EFRAG mentions that the materiality assessment is a dynamic process, and that needs to be considered for an update on an ongoing basis, but it doesn't say you need to do that as often as I mean, on an annual basis, etc. So, but what is key, and it makes total sense when we come back to what you presented earlier, Stephanie, a reassessment should be considered when material changes happen, such as an M&A event that will lead the undertaking to operate in a new sector with a totally new value chain, for instance, or a major global event such as a pandemic, or maybe a change in one of the main suppliers, etc., that will actually change the balance of what you've identified in terms of material topics. So with that, we're way over time. So thanks to the brave one that have stayed with us for this additional 10 minutes. Thanks a lot, Stephanie, for co-hosting this webinar with me. It was
Thank you so much, Marie.
Great. And yeah, do not, I mean, here you have our contact details, so we're happy to answer any additional questions that you may have. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. And have a good end of the day.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.